are doing a study of the women of the Bible this summer. And I think it's going to be really interesting. When Nelson and I went through looking at the women, we chose some ones that don't always get as much attention as others. And we left some out because some of them get their own whole Sundays and they get lots of attention. And so it was really an interesting process to narrow them down and go through them. And we realized we could have made this a much longer series, but we weren't sure how long we would want to keep focusing on this. So we're excited. I hope you guys will enjoy it. I do not have an outline for you because that's not how my brain works. Okay? But we're going to start with a little bit of the background of this story, because in order to understand what's happening, we need to know what's happening around it. Let me get this to go off my screen, so that's good. So we are in the book of 1 Kings, and this lady that we're talking about today is found in chapter 17. We're going to back up just a little bit to the tail end of chapter 16 so that we can get the context and the setting right and understand what's happening in Israel at this time. So this is happening in the northern kingdom of Israel. And this is that period of time when they had all of those kings that weren't so great. Okay. But in chapter 16 at the end, verses 29 is where I'm going to start. It's Ahab's reign in Israel, and I have it where I can share it on my screen so that it will pop up here. It says, in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, the son of Omri, began to reign over Israel, and Ahab, the son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. And Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord, more than all who were before him. They had already had a lot of kings that were being disruptive and not honoring God, and this one was the worst. So, and
Scroll up.
I'm working on that. I gotta get over to the right thing. Okay, here we go. All right. Sorry, on my screen it's got people over here too. I wish that would
Go away.
no, that ain't gonna work. Oh, that didn't work either. Okay, I'll deal with the people being on the side of my screen. Okay, and then it goes on to say, and as if it had been, sorry, I've got to read it out here because that's messing with me. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger him than all the kings of Israel who were before him. So, not only was he doing evil in the sight of the Lord, he's building places to worship. He's worshiping Baal, the god of this area. He's taken a foreign wife, which they had been warned and cautioned against and all of this, because what is that foreign wife going to do? It's going to lead you astray into the worship of other gods. And we see that that is exactly what has happened here with Ahab. Now, the reason this is important to know is because Elijah is going to come into this scene. And he is a major character in the life of the woman we are studying about. So, it sounds like we haven't gotten to the woman yet, because we haven't, but we're getting there very quickly. So, At this point, I'm gonna go on down to chapter 17. Because we're there. Now Elijah, the Tishbite of Tish in Gilead, said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." And the word of the Lord came to him, "Depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook Cherith that is east of the Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and the bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. And after a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. So Elijah has warned them, has said to Ahab that God has said there will be no rain in the land. And so God calls a drought. Now this does not seem quite as significant to us as it would have to them, because we don't really have an understanding of their culture and their gods and how that hit with them. So in an attempt to help us understand more, at that time, Baal was one of the gods of fertility. And so when rain came, that was the work of Baal in their mind. And during the dry season, that was when Baal would have to submit to the god of death, which was Mot. And so they didn't have that concept of one all-powerful God. They had that concept of multiple gods who would have to submit one to another at different times. And so a dry season would be the absence of the god Baal in their lives, because it would be a time that he was dead and submitting to the god of death. So what Elijah is telling them is that I worship one God, and he can withhold the rain or he can give it. He doesn't die, he doesn't go away, he doesn't leave, and it's not gonna rain. There's not even gonna be dew on the grass until he says so. He has that control not only over fertility, but he also has that control over death. And that's gonna come to play a little later in this story. We're gonna see that echoed again. So right now, Elijah is setting up this contest that we hear about later between Baal and God. But we've got this woman plays this central role in this before we get there. So God sends him into the wilderness, into the desert, beside a particular brook, and he has ravens deliver food, bread, and meat to him. Did anybody pick up on that it was bread and meat and what that harkens back to? Maybe another time in the wilderness.
When Jesus was in.
Well, Jesus was in the wilderness, but even earlier than that with Moses,
Okay.
manna and quail, okay? Bread and meat, and providing water in a brook, okay? So there's this provision in the midst of the wilderness. One of the sources I looked at talked about how ravens were what was bringing it to him, and ravens are usually considered scavengers, not providers. And how this is another instance of God sort of turning things upside down and showing, even in a barren desert, I can provide, and I can provide through really unusual sources and really unusual ways. I can care for those who have chosen to serve me. So, but there's a drought happening. And so what's gonna happen to that brook, that little bit of water that he's drinking out of in a drought? It's gonna dry up, and it did. Okay, so could God have caused that brook to continue? Of course, but he didn't, because he had something else in mind. And so now we move on, and here we come to the part where Our Lady enters the picture. Now, one interesting thing I found in studying all of this is that nowhere is her name mentioned. We don't have a name for this woman. And yeah, she is a widow, but you know, maybe the reason we don't have a name is because rather of focusing on who she is, we need to focus on what she does. Maybe it's to help us pay attention to her actions and what she's about and doing, rather than getting caught up on the name. But she's a good one. We're gonna get to this. Okay, so we're gonna pick up in verse 8, because the brook has dried up because there was no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks, and he called to her and said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And she was going to bring it, and he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour and a little oil in a jug. And now I am gathering a couple of sticks that I may go and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterward make something for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be empty, until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. Okay, this is part 1 of the story. There's a part 2 that we're going to get to. But part 1, Elijah is told to go, and look at where he's going. Zarephath, which is part of Sidon. Do you know who else is from Sidon? We read it a little bit earlier.
Jezebel?
Yes. Jezebel is from Sidon. So he's right in the heart of the territory where Baal worship was most prevalent. Jesus even comments later that the prophet had to flee his own country and go into the sinful cities of the Canaanites. So this is a really unexpected location for Elijah to go to hide and to receive sustenance. Just like the desert is an unusual place to go and hide and to be provided with sustenance. But God is at work in unusual places all the time. And unlike the gods, Baal and Mot and all of these others that they worship, those were considered regional gods. At that time, there was the belief that that god was the god of that territory, that region. So in proper context here today, the god of Statesville would have no power in Mooresville. Okay? But we know that our God is the God of Statesville and Mooresville and everywhere else. But that's not how the other people, the Canaanites in this area, saw it. And so for God to send his prophet right into the heart, I mean, it's like going into the Bible Belt. That's what was happening here. Elijah was going into this territory where everybody was going to be worshiping Baal. And Baal would be seen as the god having the most power. But that's where God sends him. And you're going there to dwell. And dwell there. This isn't just a pit stop. You're gonna be there for a while, couple years. This is not, you're gonna go and spend one night. You're gonna impose on somebody's hospitality long term, and they don't know it yet. So, then God says, behold, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. One of the things I looked at said that commanded might better be interpreted as ordained. I have pre-planned for this woman, because the woman doesn't seem to have any awareness that she's going to be feeding Elijah. She didn't hear the command. Okay, she does it, but there's no evidence that she had any forewarning or foreknowledge that she was going to be doing this. So ordained might fit a little bit there, that God had already appointed her, he had already selected her, he had already prepared this, but she was unaware at this time. And so he arose and he went to Zarephath, and when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. Now, there's a drought going on. Water's in short supply. He's been living out in the wilderness, being cared for by the birds. I'm thinking he looked a fright. I'm thinking he was probably a mess. And he comes up thirsty and disheveled and, hey, could you get me some water? And what does she do? She goes and does it. Now, we have to understand that at this time, in this place, hospitality was not just a suggestion. It might as well have been law, because survival depended on hospitality. In this region, at this time where you traveled by foot and societies were built around water sources, you went from town to town and you had to be supplied with water and food. And the custom at this time surrounding hospitality was even greater than our Southern hospitality. If someone shows up, you are obligated to provide them with water, food, and shelter. If you don't, it's not just seen as being rude. It is seen as an act of aggression, like an act of war, because survival depended on that. And the flip side of that, to refuse the hospitality, is equally seen as an aggressive act. Because if I'm offering you hospitality, it's a sign of peace that I don't want to make war with you. I understand you're passing through, you're traveling, you need these supplies. If you reject that, well, why would you reject it? You need this. Are you coming with a bad motive? Are you coming to do harm rather than just on your way? So she responds appropriately with this offer of hospitality to go get water. But as she goes, he makes one more request, which in their culture, in their context, is perfectly normal and expected. Could you bring me a morsel of bread as well? And the rules of hospitality there would dictate that yes, she provided. But she's caught between this norm of ancient hospitality of what is expected and the reality of famine that she is experiencing. The drought has affected them as well. She has a handful of flour and a little bit of oil and a child. Yeah. And Elijah is saying, could you bring me just a morsel of bread? And she's caught. It's not something I would want to have to decide, because to not provide that bread could be seen as that act of aggression that we just talked about. But can you take that bread out of your own child's mouth when this is the last you have and your plan after this is to die? She says, as the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die. She's at the end of her rope. This is all she's got left. Now, isn't it interesting that in the Bible, we read all over the place about caring for the widows and the orphans? This widow and her orphan son, by all expectations, should be the recipients of charity. They should be the ones that are being provided for and cared for and having their needs supplied. But God, again, He loves to turn things upside down and mix it up and do the unexpected, is taking this widow and this orphan, and instead of asking them to be the recipients of charity, He's asking them to provide it, to provide for another. It makes you think of that widow with her 2 mites, and I'm not going to go into that story because we're going to cover that one later. But when you're down to your very end and God's asking for it, what do you do? And so, let's see what she does. And Elijah said to her, do not fear. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I see those words in the Bible, do not fear, it is like a big flashing road sign that God's about to do something. Because you don't see those words, do not fear, unless there's something big about to happen. But we know that. They don't. They don't get to see the whole story the way we do. And so she's got plenty to be afraid of. But Elijah tells her, do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterward, make something for yourself and your son. Now, I've got to be honest. If it were me, I would be like, make you something first. Are you serious right now? How about I make all 3 portions at the same time? And you can have a third of whatever I've got. That's the best deal I'm going to offer you. Okay? That's where I would have been. Because, I mean, think about that. That's a little presumptuous. Go and do like you said, yeah, but first, make my little cake. And I'd be like, your cake's going to be the size of a raisin if you keep this up.
Let's make a deal when it comes around.
I know. And this woman would have been within her rights to look at him and say, I'm sorry, I just don't have it. I can't. But God had already worked this out. And so that's not what she did. But he tells her that that jar of flour will not be spent and the jug of oil will not be empty until it rains. Now, did she have any clue how long it was going to be until it rained? No. Did she have any clue how long she was going to be providing for this guy that just showed up outside and was insisting on his food first? No. But she did what was asked of her that day in that moment. And I find it interesting that in the beginning she says, as the Lord your God lives. She's acknowledging that God is real and that God is alive, that it's Elijah's God, not her God. Okay? But she still is going, there's something to this whole Hebrew God thing. Your God is something and he is alive because I've heard about him and I see what's going on and there is a drought happening right now. And so when Elijah says that the Lord says your flour won't run out and your oil won't run out, she's going, well, you know, haven't seen any rain lately.
Yeah, it doesn't mention water again. And it never says that she takes in water. It
And
doesn't say they have any water.
And so, you know, she's sitting here going, it's not raining. He said God, it wasn't gonna rain till God said it would. So if God can promise me that my flour and oil won't run out, maybe there's something to that. Maybe this is a risk I'm willing to take because what's her alternative? Yeah. I mean, the other side of that, you know, I'm sitting here going, yeah, we'll negotiate how much you get. But the flip side of that, she thinks it's already done anyway. I mean, I think maybe in her mama heart, she's probably planning, okay, I'll go ahead and make you some, and whatever I make up, I'll give to my son, and then we'll just lay down and die, and that's gonna be it. You mamas know that's how that would go. She ain't gonna eat something when her baby's hungry, but they were that close to death. And here comes this opportunity, that little bit of hope that something may be changing and that maybe there's a source of life here after all. So she went and did as Elijah said, and she and he and her household ate for many days. And the jar of flour was not spent, and the jug of oil did not become empty, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by Elijah. So, you've got to know that, you know, the first time she went and made some and it didn't run out, she's like, maybe there was more in there than I thought. Maybe my perception was a little off, but you know, about the fourth or fifth time, she's like, oh, there's something happening here. There's no way this would have stretched this far. But at this point, don't you think there's that sigh of relief? There's that moment of survival. But notice it doesn't say that the jar filled up to the top. You don't get to store up manna. That's not how that works. And there's that same echo here of that depending on the Lord daily, that you're not, he didn't promise her a whole storehouse of flour and oil. He promised that what she had wouldn't run out. Didn't promise an overabundance, but it's that daily requirement, that daily need being met. So they're eating, food's being provided. So you would assume that there's that little bit of relief of, okay, maybe we're not gonna die from starvation. My son, you know, we're probably doing a little bit better health-wise because we've got this nourishment happening now. And it doesn't tell us, we're getting ready to transition to part 2. And it doesn't tell us how long it is between part 1 and part 2. Now, we know from this time period and all of this that there was about 2 years that Elijah probably spent in this area, okay? And so it could have been just a couple months. It could have been a year and a half. We don't know between part 1 and part 2. But here comes part 2. After this, that's the only transition we get. The son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill. And his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. Now, there's a question here that sometimes comes up about whether this son was really dead or just really ill, okay? For our purposes, it doesn't really matter, okay? Because you have to understand that in this time, it means he's either as good as dead, or a couple days past dead. Okay, because you weren't truly dead, gone, no hope of anything for a couple days after you die. So 3 days, in fact, is that time before they really were like completely dead. The soul was gone, death is completely complete. They didn't have ultrasounds or heart rate monitors or any of that stuff. So there is some question here about that people want to nitpick. He's either dead or right at death's door, okay? I just don't think it's worth nitpicking, but I think it's worth saying, people are gonna get distracted by that. I don't think we need to. And she said to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." Now, at this point, she's calling Elijah, "O man of God." Not, "O man of your God," "O man of God." I think it's noteworthy here that now I think this is the start of her relationship with God, or our indication of her having a relationship with God, that she thinks that the reason this travesty has come upon her is because it's bringing her sin to remembrance. There's an acknowledgement here of her sin and God's separation from sin, okay? And how there is a sin problem, and she's putting that together. Now, do I think that God killed her son because of her sins? No, I don't, okay? But I do think that the death of her son, or the severe illness of her son, whatever's going on here, caused her to look at her life and to see what's going on, and to realize that, hey, I've been eating this bread, I've been using this flour, and I've been using this oil, but have I really changed? Have I really committed to serving this God? Have I really acknowledged him as God and Lord? Or am I reaping the benefits and not really paying any price, counting any cost? I don't have any skin in the game. I can keep going on in my community as if I was anybody else, worshiping the gods of our region. But she is acknowledging that something is happening here. And what does Elijah say to her? "Give me your son." And he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged, and he laid him on his own bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn, by killing her son?" Then he stretched himself upon the child 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. Okay, so Elijah takes this boy and takes him up and lays him out on the bed, and he lays down on top of him and prays 3 different times, asking God to restore life to this boy. And then there's this one little sentence that captures my imagination. And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah. We're doing our Sunday school lesson is talking about prayer and the power that is in prayer. And I can't think of a better example of the power that is in prayer than this right here. Elijah cried out to God, and God listened. Now, God could have just as easily said, "No, that's not what we need to do right now." In this instance, he didn't. But it shows that our prayers do have a purpose, they do have a meaning, they do reach God. He does listen to our concerns. He hears our prayers. And he doesn't just hear, he listens. There's a difference in hearing and listening. Children are really good at hearing, they're not always good at listening. We work on that a lot. But God doesn't just hear our prayers, he also listens. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not going to submit himself to us. That's not how that works. But he does listen and hear us and act in our best interests. Now, the child revived, and Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." Boy, have we come a long way in these 16 verses from as the Lord your God lives to you are a man of God and the words in your mouth are truth. God is speaking through you, and what you say has power. That's a big transition. And it all happens because she took that risk of sharing her bread and her oil with Elijah. Okay, I'm gonna look at my notes real quick to see if I missed anything, because I haven't looked down this whole time. Because I don't really do that either. The one thing, and I sort of hit on this, was that she really did ignore her parental instinct when she went to feed Elijah, before feeding herself and her child. There was a strong parental instinct there that would have caused her to act oppositely, but she moved past that.
That's a biggie.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, I'm not a mom. I'm not, okay? But I'm a very proud aunt. And I've been an aunt for almost 19 years now. And you mess with one of my nieces or nephews. It's not gonna be pretty. So I can't imagine how much worse it would be if I was actually a mom. You know, I know that has to be stronger. And so, yeah, that's huge. Because I wouldn't be eating, I would be giving it all to the kids. They don't even have to be my kids or my nieces or nephews even.
Kind of reminds me of Abraham and Isaac. That was his only son.
Huge
God
sacrifice.
said sacrificing.
Yeah.
He had faith.
I hate that we don't know her name. I do. I wish we knew her name. But I think that her story and her actions are even more important. And I think it says something that God chose someone living on the margins, someone who wouldn't have been considered important in a foreign city, town, whatever, where foreign gods were worshipped, that God used her to provide for Elijah for an extended period of time. And through that, she came to have some sort of faith to at least recognize God.
I think it's interesting that it seems that she knew of the Israeli God in the middle of this Baal worship country. And what had happened, or what had been said, how had the word gotten around? That was something to reckon with. and
Well, they were neighbors.
Uh-huh.
You know, this is happening, so I looked at a map, it's actually right here in my Bible. So here, this green area would be the nation of Israel, and Sidon would be right up here on the coast.
So it's not that far away.
It's not very far, okay? They're not traveling a great distance here. It would seem like a great distance because of their modes of transportation, but it's not a huge distance away. They would have known and heard about things happening, and you also have to remember, this is, what has already happened in scripture. They've already come back from Egypt, they've wandered in the wilderness, they've taken over several Canaanite cities, they've settled in the land, they've had the Davidic kingdom already, and it has split into Israel and Judah. So they've been here for a long time, and God has done a lot in that area. Even when they were wandering in the wilderness, the Canaanites had heard about the Hebrew God and what he had done. So word travels when big stuff's happening.
She could have looked at it two ways though. She could have looked at it like, well, your God's the one that stopping the rain. Why should I believe you?
Mm-hmm,
Or she could have looked at it, well, if his God stopped the rain, he can provide.
mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a question.
Okay,
Why was she picking up sticks if she really thought she was gonna die?
to make the fire, to cook her bread.
So you think she really thought she was going to die?
Yeah, I think she was picking up sticks to build her fire to cook that last bit of bread. I think she wasn't picking up a whole lot of sticks. I think she was picking up what she needed. Yeah,
That makes sense.
Listen,
because if she was that close to death, she would have had the energy to do extra work, and there's no reason for us to think that she wasn't. One of the commentaries I read did talk about there was, some people speculate, was she just bad at estimating and she was just telling Elijah that there was only so much? But I don't think that a mother says, I'm cooking my last bit of bread and then we're gonna go die. A mother does not talk about her child dying unless it's right there pressing down on her, because she wouldn't want to admit that.
well, I was just gonna ask, do you think Elijah was just being a good Jew when he carried the boy upstairs and then he questioned God and said, why are you doing this to me? Why did you take this boy now that this lady's been feeding me and been good to me? And now you've taken her son. I mean, the Jews at that time believed that anything bad that happened to you was because of some sin in your life. So was he saying, the lady said, you're doing this, your God took my son because of sin, some sin I committed. Was Elijah agreeing with that?
So one of the things I read in preparing for this, and y'all, it was so hard to focus on this woman and not Elijah in this story, okay? I'll forgive you for bringing him up, but there is so much happening in this passage with Elijah too. But I tried to push that aside so we could focus on the woman. But part of what is happening here is Elijah is like building steam, okay? He's building up to bigger and bigger works. Okay, so first he announces this drought, and then he goes into the desert and God provides for him with the ravens and the brook, okay? Which is big, okay? Then he goes in and asks the widow for the bread, and there's a little bit of a bigger miracle here in God providing the oil and the continued flour. And then this woman's son dies, and Elijah asks God for a big miracle. Now, I mentioned at the beginning about about Baal being the god of fertility and Mot being the god of death, and how they had to submit one to another. By God raising this woman's son from the dead is showing that he's the god of fertility and death. That Mot and Baal got nothing on him, okay? And this is like that build up to the big Elijah event that's coming, okay? So I sort of see it as Elijah okay, I asked God, God provided for me in the desert. God provided for me here with a bigger miracle. Now I've asked God to provide for me again by raising this boy from the dead. So far, God's answered really well. God's had my back this whole time. And think about it, you would kind of need that before you go in and build this altar and drown it with water and ask God to send fire. You're gonna need some baby steps. Not that raising someone from the dead is a baby step, but you're gonna need some steps to where you feel that confidence and that faith to ask for something that big. Think about it, a kid doesn't ask a parent for a Ferrari. No, they start out asking for a cookie, and when the parent gives them the cookie, the kid goes, oh, okay. They give out good stuff, and they may never get a Ferrari, but still, you ask for little things before you get to that big thing. And so I think that's part of what's happening here with Elijah. But I think more than anything, it's God showing that he's God. And these other things y'all are worshiping, they just don't have the oomph. And he's helping them to see that. And I think the widow sees that. And I think that it's a foretaste, a little foreshadowing for what's about to come, where God's going to show a whole lot of people that this Baal dude isn't much of anything.
The woman is also kind of a plant into this community, of someone to tell the story. Because there's going to be Elijah coming from the outside, say this, but then there's going to be a woman from the inside the community saying, yeah, this God's for real.
We don't know anything about their interaction in this 2 years either, what he taught her about God.
And we don't know if he continues to have communication with her afterwards either.
Surely she didn't just feed him 3 meals a day and not interact any, anything about his God.
Because he dwelled in the house.
Yeah, he lived there with them. Yeah,
I think that's unusual too, isn't it?
it would have been.
For him to stay with a widow.
Somewhere it mentions her household.
You just said with
Yeah.
all that culture.
But somewhere it mentions in here her household, so she wasn't just her and her son, there was other people.
Okay, it said household.
Yeah.
It said household. Now, how much of a household she had, we don't know, but, and the household part is mentioned later in part 2, like I mentioned, where if God has been providing bread and oil for her financially, she might have stabilized a little bit more to be able to have more of a household. But at first, it just mentions her and her son. So in the beginning, it could have just been, but with having Elijah there, it could have expanded to more of a household. So, but yeah, that seems a little odd to me too, Terry, but that hospitality with providing food, water, shelter was a big deal. That may have outweighed the propriety.
She offered him meals.
He was in the upstairs room.
She offered him meals.
Mhm.
Well, I'm worried about them not having water. 'Cause it doesn't say anything about water.
I know, it doesn't. But she was going to get the water when he mentioned the
She
bread.
never brings it back.
Well, it says that she went and did as he told her, so she did.
Okay.
There's a well.
Yeah,
There's a well somewhere, okay.
yeah,
The sister. Because they had no water.
yeah. They didn't have enough for all those crops.
They needed that rain.
So, y'all, this has been fun.
Very, very good.
So we're gonna get deep into some of these other ladies as well. And I know deep well, Nelson's already thinking of a joke back there.
No, I just think Elijah's a typical man and a typical preacher.
He's expecting it on her house.
Shows up, man. Just feed me.
Well, he must not have been Baptist or fried chicken with it. So, I appreciate all of you coming and being here and having questions and participating. We'll do it again next week. I think next week Nelson's doing a
Am I?
study. I think it's your turn next week.
I just thought of something that's interesting, when Elijah was in the desert,
Phoebe, so
wilderness,
I'm not
the
gonna-
ravens brought him meat and bread.
Mhm.
When she gets to her house, he just gets bread.
Yeah. Well, you know,
You take what you need.
that's what the widow and her son was living on. And so why would he expect more than what she was
They
getting?
already have what they have.
Yeah. So, there we go. But I thought it was interesting that she and Jezebel were from the same town too, and such different reactions to God and to Elijah. So,
We're doing Phoebe Sunday. I don't remember what we're gonna do next Wednesday. I'm still working on Phoebe.
I can tell you.
Well, y'all did such a wonderful job Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
I enjoyed that so much.
We did too.
Okay. Next week is Dorcas. Dorcas is next week.
Next week or next?
Next Wednesday. Sunday is Phoebe and then Dorcas. And then we get Christina doing Priscilla on a Wednesday. We've got quite the lineup. My next Wednesday is Tamar, y'all pray for me.
That's a good one.
We got a lot happening there. So.
Tamar brings a lot to the table.
Yes.